Florence. The name itself brings to mind beauty, art, genius. But beneath the polished marble and painted frescoes of the Medici era, something far more wild, more extravagant, more utterly unbelievable was happening. Forget your modern reality television. For the powerful Medici family, life was a continuous, mind-blowing party, a non-stop parade of wealth and power, so extreme it would make today's billionaires blush. We are talking about festivals where banquets featured roasted peacocks re-feathered in their plumage, where thousands of gallons of wine flowed like rivers, where entire streets became elaborate stages for mythical beasts and gods. These were not just parties, they were meticulously crafted spectacles designed to show off the Medici's absolute dominance, their artistic patronage, and their bottomless pockets. Prepare to dive deep into a world where reality bent to the whims of the most powerful family in Europe, where the line between art and pure unadulterated excess vanished completely. Number 10. The Grand Return of Cosimo the Elder. The year is 1434. Florence breathes a collective sigh of relief, or perhaps a gasp of anticipation. Cosimo de' Medici, the formidable patriarch of the banking dynasty, is coming home. He had been exiled, a political maneuver by rival families like the Albizzi, but his absence had left the city in economic turmoil and political instability. The Florentine people, perhaps swayed by the promise of prosperity returning with their exiled banker, voted overwhelmingly for his return. And return he did, not just as a man, but as a living symbol of Florence's renewed destiny. The festival celebrating his re-entry into the city was not merely a welcoming party. It was a carefully orchestrated performance of power, wealth, and popular support. The city had been preparing for weeks. Streets were swept clean, houses along the main routes were draped with rich tapestries, and temporary arches, decorated with garlands of laurel and myrtle, spanned the thoroughfares. These weren't just simple decorations, they were artistic statements often designed by the era's finest craftsmen. Imagine the light catching the gold thread woven into velvet banners shimmering in the autumn sun. The air, crisp and clear, carried the scent of freshly cut greenery and the anticipation of 1,000 eager Florentines. Cosimo, approaching the city gates, was not alone. He was accompanied by a vast retinue of loyal supporters, prominent citizens, and armed guards. Their horses, some imported from the finest stables in Naples and Lombardy, pranced with feathered plumes on their bridles, their hooves striking a rhythmic beat on the cobblestones. The clatter and whinny of the horses mixed with the murmur of the crowd, a rising tide of sound that swelled into cheers as Cosimo's procession drew closer. He rode a magnificent white charger, its mane intricately braided with silver ribbons. Cosimo himself, a man of shrewd intellect and quiet power, was dressed in a sumptuous, yet not overtly ostentatious, cloak of deep crimson velvet, trimmed with sable fur. His demeanor was one of calm authority, a subtle nod to the control he was reasserting over the city. As the procession moved through the Porta San Gallo, the cheers erupted. The Florentine populace, lining the streets, threw flowers and confetti made from colored paper. Musicians, positioned on elevated platforms, played trumpets and shawms, their fanfare echoing between the stone buildings. The trumpets, long and gleaming, caught the sunlight, their sound a brassy proclamation of the new order. Drummers kept a driving beat, an insistent rhythm that pulsed through the city. Choirs, stationed in various piazzas, sang hymns of welcome and songs praising Cosimo's wisdom and foresight. These weren't casual singers. They were often members of religious confraternities, trained vocalists, adding a layer of solemnity and grandeur to the celebratory chaos. The procession made its way to the Palazzo della Signoria, the heart of Florentine government. Along the route, civic guilds displayed their banners, each emblazoned with their unique symbols, the wool merchants with their lamb, the silk weavers with their shuttle, the bankers with their coins. As members of the guilds, dressed in their finest ceremonial robes, stood proudly, acknowledging Cosimo's return as a victory for Florentine commerce and prosperity. They were not just spectators, they were active participants in this reaffirmation of civic life. Upon reaching the Palazzo della Signoria, Cosimo dismounted to the applause of the assembled Florentine officials. He was greeted by members of the priorate, the city's ruling council, who had, with strategic foresight, orchestrated his recall. Inside the palazzo, a more intimate yet still magnificent reception awaited. The great hall was decorated with banners and fresh flowers. Tables were laden with a feast that showcased Florence's abundance and its trading connections. Roasted capons, plump and golden brown, were served alongside platters of cold meats, including prosciutto and spiced sausages. Fresh bread, baked that morning, filled the air with its warm aroma. There were bowls of olives, green and black, imported from Tuscany's sun-drenched groves, and cheeses from the mountain pastures, each with its distinct flavor. Sweets were plentiful, a testament to the burgeoning sugar trade and the skill of Florentine confectioners. Almond pastries, delicate marzipan fruits, and candied citrus peels were arranged on silver trays. Wine flowed freely from large ceramic amphorae, red and white, sourced from the surrounding Tuscan hills. The clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation, and the occasional burst of laughter filled the hall. Servants, dressed in the Medici livery of red and white, moved quietly through the room, ensuring every guest was attended to. The atmosphere was one of refined celebration, a stark contrast to the previous years of political wrangling. This banquet was not just about feeding guests, it was about demonstrating that Florence, under Medici guidance, was stable, prosperous, and once again a place of joyous abundance. The display of such plenty was a subtle yet powerful message to any lingering dissenters. Number 9. Piero the Gouty's Grand Tournament of Love and Glory. The year is 1465. Piero di Cosimo de' Medici, known to history as Piero the Gouty, due to his debilitating illness, was not the charismatic figure his father Cosimo had been. Yet, he understood the power of spectacle, especially when his own health was failing. To celebrate the knighting of his two sons, Lorenzo and Giuliano, and to affirm the family's continued prestige, Piero orchestrated a grand tournament. This was more than just a display of martial skill. It was a carefully choreographed theatrical event steeped in the chivalric ideals of the past, but executed with Florentine Renaissance flair and, of course, Medici money. The tournament served as a vibrant declaration that despite Piero's physical infirmity, the Medici family's influence and power remained as robust as ever. The chosen location was the Piazza Santa Croce, a vast open square that could accommodate thousands of spectators, and the elaborate setup required for jousting. For weeks leading up to the event, carpenters and artists transformed the piazza. A grand wooden viewing stand, draped in scarlet and gold velvet, was erected for the Medici family and their most esteemed guests. Around the perimeter, temporary pavilions, each representing a different noble house or knightly order, were set up, adorned with their respective coats of arms and colorful banners. The smell of fresh-cut lumber mingled with the earthy scent of the churned-up earth, prepared for the horses. The day of the tournament dawned bright and clear, the sun glinting off polished armor. The procession began with an explosion of color and sound. Trumpeters, their cheeks puffed, announced the arrival of each knight with a series of powerful fanfares. Drummers kept a steady, exciting beat. Each knight entered the piazza, accompanied by his retinue, a visual narrative of his wealth and allegiance. Lorenzo de' Medici, then a young man of 16, made a particularly striking entrance. His armor, crafted by the finest Florentine artisans, gleamed inlaid with gold and silver. His helmet was topped with a soaring crest of white ostrich plumes. His horse, a magnificent Frisian stallion, was caparisoned in a rich tapestry depicting a lion rampant, the Medici emblem. Lorenzo's device for the tournament was a diamond, symbolizing constancy, accompanied by the motto "Le temps revient," time returns, a hopeful nod to the family's enduring legacy. Giuliano, slightly younger, was equally splendid, though with a different thematic emphasis. His retinue was perhaps even more flamboyant, including pages dressed in silk costumes leading his horse, which was draped in velvet embroidered with pearls. Giuliano's chosen motif often leaned towards themes of love and youthful ardor, reflecting his charming and artistic disposition. The air was filled with the scents of horse sweat, leather, and the perfumes worn by the ladies in the stands. The sounds of clattering armor, the enthusiastic shouts of the crowd, and the constant calls of vendors selling roasted chestnuts and sweet wine filled the piazza. The jousts themselves were fierce and exhilarating. Knights, armed with blunted lances, charged at each other across the central barrier, aiming to unseat their opponent or break their lance. The crowd roared with every successful strike, every splintering lance. The sounds of impact were sharp, decisive cracks that punctuated the general din. Despite the blunted weapons, injuries were not uncommon, adding a frisson of danger to the spectacle. The knights were not just competing for victory, they were performing for the adoring gaze of the ladies in the stands, for the honor of their families, and for the glory of Florence itself. Between rounds of jousting, various entertainments unfolded. Acrobats tumbled and spun, displaying feats of agility that drew gasps from the audience. Jesters, in their motley costumes, performed comedic routines, their bells jingling as they capered. Musicians played lively dance tunes on lutes, flutes, and harps, their melodies weaving through the square. Food and drink were abundant. Small stands set up around the piazza offered hot spiced wine, a welcome warmth in the cooler autumn air, and simple but satisfying fare like focaccia bread and dried figs. For the Medici and their elite guests in the grandstand, servants circulated with silver platters laden with more delicate treats, small game birds roasted to perfection, delicate tarts filled with seasonal fruits, and candied nuts. Each bite was a small luxury. As evening approached, the tournament concluded, not with a simple winner, but with a grand ceremony celebrating all participants. Lorenzo and Giuliano, though young, had performed admirably, solidifying their reputation as worthy heirs. The piazza, once a scene of martial prowess, transformed into a space for a grand banquet under the fading light. Long tables were set up, illuminated by hundreds of flickering torches and oil lamps. The scent of roasted meats mingled with the smoky aroma of the torches. Guests were served multi-course meals, beginning with light broths, moving to roasted game like pheasant and wild boar, and concluding with elaborate desserts. The wine flowed freely, warming the celebrants against the evening chill. The entire event was a testament to the Medici's ability to blend ancient traditions with contemporary extravagance, ensuring their place at the pinnacle of Florentine society. Number 8, Lorenzo, the Magnificent's Triumph of Bacchus and Ariadne Carnival. The year is 1490, just 2 years before his death. Lorenzo de' Medici, known as the Magnificent, still reigns as the uncrowned king of Florence. His genius wasn't just in politics or art patronage, but in understanding the soul of his city. And nowhere was that soul more vibrant than during Carnival. Lorenzo didn't just allow Carnival, he sculpted it, infused it with his own poetic spirit, turning the traditional pre-Lenten revelry into a series of philosophical, mythological, and utterly decadent public spectacles. The Triumph of Bacchus and Ariadne stands as one of the most famous and elaborate of these street parades, a testament to Lorenzo's creative vision and the Medici's incredible wealth. The concept was simple. A series of elaborate floats, or carri, would parade through the city, each carrying a different allegorical or mythological scene. But the execution was anything but simple. For weeks, workshops across Florence buzzed with activity. Artists like Piero di Cosimo and Francesco Granacci were commissioned to design the floats, their imaginations running wild. Sculptors carved enormous figures from wood and papier-mâché. Painters adorned them with vibrant colors and gold leaf. Tailors stitched together thousands of yards of silk, velvet, and brocade for the costumes of the performers. The air in these workshops hummed with the energy of creation, the smell of paint and glue mingling with the rustle of expensive fabrics. On the day of the triumph, the streets of Florence were packed. Every window, every balcony, every rooftop was crammed with eager spectators. The main arteries of the city, from the Porta al Prato to the Piazza della Signoria, became a vast outdoor theater. The procession began at dusk, as the setting sun cast long, dramatic shadows. This was intentional. The floats were designed to be illuminated by thousands of torches and oil lamps carried by attendants, creating a magical, flickering glow that transformed familiar streets into an otherworldly landscape. The scent of pine resin from the torches mixed with the general smell of the crowd and the lingering aroma of the day's feasting. The centerpiece of the parade, the Triumph of Bacchus and Ariadne float, was a true marvel. It depicted the god of wine, Bacchus, in his chariot, accompanied by Ariadne, the Cretan princess he rescued. Bacchus, played by a handsome young Florentine, was garlanded with vine leaves and grapes, his costume a shimmering gold tunic. Ariadne, portrayed by a woman of striking beauty, wore flowing white silk, her hair adorned with pearls. The chariot itself was enormous, pulled by a team of actors dressed as satyrs and maenads, their bodies painted and adorned with animal skins. Around them, performers, dressed as drunken revelers, danced and sang, tossing real grapes and small coins into the cheering crowd. Their laughter and shouts mingled with the music. Following Bacchus's chariot came floats depicting other mythological figures: Silenus, the wise old satyr, riding a donkey, surrounded by a chorus of singers. Pans and nymphs frolicked amongst painted trees. There were floats representing the various seasons, each adorned with appropriate fruits, flowers, and costume performers. One float might feature spring, adorned with blossoms, while another showed autumn, heavy with bounty. Each float was a moving tableau, a work of art that engaged all the senses. The materials used were incredibly rich. Real gold thread on the costumes, genuine animal skins for the satyrs, elaborate headdresses made with exotic feathers. The sheer scale of the undertaking was breathtaking. Music was integral to the spectacle. Lorenzo himself composed some of the canti carnascialeschi, or carnival songs, that were sung during the parade. These songs, often witty and sometimes risque, were performed by choruses of singers accompanying each float. The most famous line from the Bacchus and Ariadne song, "Quanta bella giovinezza che si fugge tuttavia," "How beautiful is youth, which flees so quickly," resonated through the streets, a poignant reminder of life's fleeting pleasures even amidst such revelry. The music was vibrant and lively, played on a range of instruments: lutes, pipes, drums, and trumpets. The combined sound of hundreds of voices singing, the clamor of the instruments, and the shouts of the crowd created a massive, joyful soundscape. As the floats passed, the festive atmosphere intensified. Wine freely flowed from public fountains that had been temporarily converted into dispensers. Citizens carried cups and pitchers, filling them with cheap but potent local wine. Food stalls sprung up everywhere, offering roasted meats on spits, sweet pastries, and savory tarts. The smell of cooking mingled with the sweet aroma of wine and the earthy scent of the torches. People danced in the streets, strangers embraced in spontaneous joy. The entire city became a vast, living stage, a place where social hierarchies blurred, and everyone, from the lowliest artisan to the wealthiest merchant, participated in the communal celebration of life and beauty. This was Lorenzo's genius to transform a religious holiday into an expression of Florentine humanism, showcasing the city's artistic prowess, its wealth, and its spirit of joyful abandon, all under the guiding hand of the Medici. Number 7. The Nuptials of Lorenzo, the Magnificent and Clarice Orsini. The year is 1469. This was not a love match in the modern sense. Lorenzo de' Medici, the future Magnificent, was a Florentine through and through, a man of intellect and art. The Clarice Orsini was from a powerful aristocratic Roman family, part of the papal nobility. Their marriage was a strategic alliance, a carefully orchestrated move by Lorenzo's mother, Lucrezia Tornabuoni, to elevate the Medici family's social standing beyond mere banking and commerce. But even a political marriage, especially for a family like the Medici, was an excuse for an unparalleled display of wealth, power, and Florentine artistic flair. The wedding was a week-long extravaganza that captivated the city and showcased the Medici's ambition. The festivities began with Clarice's grand arrival in Florence. She entered the city through the Porta al Prato, not just in a simple carriage, but in a magnificent procession. Her dowry, a staggering amount of money, jewels, and rich fabrics, was displayed openly, carried on mules and carts draped in silk. This was a direct visual representation of the wealth and influence she brought to the Medici family. Clarice herself was dressed in a gown of shimmering silver brocade, adorned with pearls and sapphires. Her hair, intricately braided, was woven with threads of gold. She sat in a velvet-lined carriage pulled by 4 white horses, their manes braided with ribbons. The cheers of the crowd were immense, a welcoming roar for the woman who would marry their future leader. The scent of fresh flowers, thrown by children along the route, mingled with the scent of the horses and the excited crowd. The main wedding ceremony took place in the Palazzo Medici, the family's magnificent urban palace. The courtyard was transformed into an enchanted garden, decorated with fragrant plants, fountains, and colorful tapestries. The palace's great hall, where the banquet would be held, was a symphony of luxury. Chandeliers, hung with hundreds of candles, cast a warm, flickering glow on the frescoes and gilded carvings. The walls were draped with tapestries, depicting classical scenes and allegories, many woven with gold and silver thread. The long tables were set with the finest Florentine linen, intricately embroidered and laid with silver and gold platters, bowls, and drinking vessels. The clinking of these precious metals as guests arrived added a subtle chime to the growing murmur of conversation. The wedding banquet was a culinary masterpiece, a testament to the Medici's ability to procure the rarest and most expensive ingredients. The meal consisted of multiple courses, each a spectacle in itself. There were roasted peacocks, their iridescent plumage carefully reattached to their cooked bodies, presented as if still alive. Dishes of roasted swan and pheasant, glistening with herbs and spices, filled the air with their rich aromas. There were platters of fresh fish, brought from the Tyrrhenian Sea, delicately prepared and garnished with citrus. Game meats like wild boar and venison were served in rich sauces. For those with a sweet tooth, there were sugar sculptures of mythological figures, often reaching several feet in height, each a temporary work of edible art. Marzipan candies, candied fruits, and spiced cakes were abundant, arranged in decorative patterns. Wine, both red and white, flowed from silver ewers into crystal goblets, never allowed to run dry. The sound of clinking glasses, appreciative murmurs, and light laughter filled the vast hall. After the banquet, the entertainment began. The musicians, trained in the latest musical styles, played lutes, viols, and harps, filling the palace with melodies both stately and lively. Singers performed madrigals and more playful canti carnascialeschi, adding a melodic layer to the atmosphere. There were professional dancers who performed intricate steps and graceful movements in colorful, flowing costumes. A popular form of entertainment was the intermezzi, short theatrical pieces performed between acts of a play, or in this case, between courses of the banquet. These often involved elaborate costumes, special effects, and allegorical characters, blending myth with contemporary celebration. For instance, a scene might depict Venus descending from the heavens on a cloud machine, showering confetti and small gifts upon the guests. The scents of perfume worn by the guests mingled with the aroma of the food and the burning candles, creating a rich sensory experience. The festivities continued for several days. There were additional banquets, open-air dances in the palace gardens, and various public entertainments. Small tournaments and mock battles were staged in the piazzas, allowing the young men of Florence to display their prowess. Gifts were exchanged, not just between the families, but also between the Medici and the prominent Florentine citizens who attended. The entire event was meticulously documented by contemporary chroniclers, eager to record every detail of this union between Florence's de facto ruling family and one of Rome's most ancient noble houses. The marriage of Lorenzo and Clarice, while a political necessity, became a grand demonstration of Medici power, a declaration to all of Italy that the family was not merely wealthy, but also refined, cultured, and capable of staging a spectacle fit for royalty. Number 6. The Feast of the Magi Procession. The Feast of the Epiphany, celebrating the arrival of the Magi, was a significant religious holiday in Florence. But for the Medici, especially during the 15th century, it was much more than a holy day. It was an annual, lavish, and extraordinarily expensive procession, a vibrant tapestry woven with religious devotion, civic pride, and an undeniable display of Medici power and wealth. The Medici family had a particular devotion to the Magi, seeing themselves as patrons of the confraternity of the Magi, or the Compagnia dei Magi. This allowed them to subtly position themselves as the wise leaders guiding Florence, just as the Magi guided themselves to Bethlehem. The procession took place on January 6th, traversing a carefully chosen route from the Church of San Marco to the Baptistery, and sometimes extending to the Palazzo Medici itself, weeks before preparations would begin. Artisans were commissioned to create new costumes, banners, and props. Stable masters readied the finest horses, some brought from distant lands, their coats gleaming, their manes and tails intricately braided. The scent of pine and frankincense used in the churches began to waft through the city as the day approached. On the day itself, the streets were lined with spectators. The air was cold but crisp, and the anticipation was palpable. The procession was meticulously organized, a moving theatrical event designed to impress. It began with various religious confraternities, each carrying their banners and dressed in their distinctive robes. Then came the heart of the procession, the three Magi Kings, personified by prominent Florentine citizens, often members of the Medici family or their close allies. These were not simple costumes. Each king was dressed in incredibly opulent robes, often made of silk, brocade, velvet, and cloth of gold, embroidered with real pearls and jewels. Their crowns glittered with precious stones, catching the weak winter sun. The fabric moved with a soft rustle as they walked or rode their magnificent horses. The kings rode on horses that were themselves works of art. These were not just any horses, they were often Arabian steeds, known for their beauty and spirited gait, or powerful destriers richly caparisoned with velvet and gold embroidery. One king might ride a pure white horse, its bridle adorned with silver bells. Another might ride a dark bay, its saddle draped with crimson velvet and gold tassels. The horse's hooves clattered rhythmically on the cobblestones, a sound that blended with the constant murmur of the crowd. The scent of horses mingled with the expensive perfumes worn by the participants, and the lingering smoke from household fires filled the crisp air. But the real spectacle lay in the retinue that accompanied the kings. This was where the Medici truly showed their might. Hundreds of participants, dressed in costumes of dazzling color and design, followed the kings. There were pages and squires, knights in polished armor, foreign dignitaries in their national dress, and even actors portraying exotic figures from the East. Imagine hundreds of people, each in a unique handcrafted costume. Some might wear turbans wrapped in shimmering silks, adorned with feathers. Others wore long, flowing robes of jewel-toned velvets. The movement of so many rich fabrics created a flowing, shimmering river of color down the street. The sounds of hundreds of footsteps, interspersed with the clinking of armor and the soft rustle of silk, formed a continuous hum. The procession was not silent. Musicians played trumpets, drums, and shawms, their fanfare echoing through the narrow streets. Choirs sang hymns and devotional songs, their voices soaring into the cold air. The combination of music and the sheer visual splendor created an overwhelming sensory experience for the spectators. The scent of burning incense, carried in censers by priests, added another layer of aroma, mingling with the natural sense of the crowd and the city. One of the most striking elements was the inclusion of exotic animals. The Medici, through their vast trade networks, were able to acquire rare creatures that astonished the Florentine populace. Elephants, giraffes, lions, and even camels were sometimes led through the streets as part of the procession, drawing gasps of wonder from the crowd. An elephant, its enormous size and unusual appearance a source of awe, might be caparisoned in bright cloths and led by handlers in foreign attire. The low rumble of an elephant's footsteps, the occasional roar of a lion, or the soft padding of a camel's hooves added to the strange and wonderful sounds of the parade. These animals were not just a curiosity, they were a living testament to the Medici's global reach and their ability to command resources from across the known world. The procession culminated at the Palazzo Medici, where the Magi, often accompanied by members of the Medici family, would enter for a private feast. For the public, the streets remained a vibrant scene of celebration. Vendors sold sweet wine and spiced cakes, filling the air with their tempting aromas. Jugglers and acrobats performed impromptu shows. The entire city became a stage for a day, a grand spectacle of faith, power, and dazzling display. The Feast of the Magi procession was more than a religious observance. It was an annual reminder of the Medici's profound influence on Florence, a dazzling display of their carefully cultivated image as wise, wealthy, and devout leaders. Number 5. The Tournament of Giuliano de' Medici. The year is 1475. Florence is buzzing with anticipation for a tournament that would go down in history, not just for its sporting prowess, but for its sheer artistic and poetic grandeur. This was the famous Giostra of Giuliano de' Medici, orchestrated by his elder brother, Lorenzo the Magnificent. While ostensibly a knightly competition, it was a profound act of artistic patronage, a theatrical showcase, and a bold political statement. It was a celebration of youthful beauty, chivalric ideals, and the soaring cultural achievements of the Florentine Renaissance, all under the guiding hand of the Medici. The chosen venue was the Piazza Santa Croce, once again transformed into a grand arena. Weeks of preparation saw the construction of viewing stands, the erection of elaborately painted pavilions for each knight, and the laying out of the jousting lists. The square was adorned with banners depicting the Medici coat of arms, alongside the symbols of other noble Florentine families. The scent of fresh-cut wood and the anticipation of the coming spectacle filled the air, mingling with the everyday smells of the bustling city. On the day of the tournament, Florence awoke to the sound of trumpets and drums. The city's populace, from humble artisans to wealthy merchants, flocked to the piazza, eager for the spectacle. The grand procession of the knights was the first breathtaking event. Each knight entered with his own retinue, a carefully curated display of wealth, artistry, and symbolic meaning. Giuliano de' Medici, young, handsome, and charismatic, was the star of the show. His entrance was a masterpiece of allegorical display, designed by the celebrated painter Sandro Botticelli and other artists. Giuliano's armor, crafted by the finest armorers, was exquisite. It was polished to a gleaming silver, intricately etched with classical motifs. Over it, he wore a surcoat of white velvet, embroidered with golden threads depicting a fierce lion, a symbol of Florence and Medici strength. His helmet was topped with a soaring crest of plumes. His horse, a magnificent destrier, was caparisoned in a rich velvet cloth, embroidered with pearls and precious stones. The horse's movements were graceful yet powerful, its hooves clattering on the packed earth. The scent of horse leather and the crisp, clean smell of polished metal filled the immediate vicinity of his procession. But the truly extraordinary aspect of Giuliano's entrance was the allegorical retinue that accompanied him. There was a young woman representing Simonetta Vespucci, Giuliano's proclaimed Lady Love, whose beauty was famed throughout Florence. She was dressed as a nymph, her gown flowing white silk, her hair adorned with fresh flowers. She was followed by figures representing classical deities Venus, Cupid, and Minerva, each portrayed by actors in elaborate, historically inspired costumes. These figures were not just static representations, they moved gracefully, engaging the crowd with gestures and expressions. The costumes were designed with incredible attention to detail, using lavish fabrics like shimmering silks, heavy velvets, and brocades. The gold and silver threads caught the sunlight, making the entire procession sparkle. The soft rustle of silk and velvet, combined with the low murmur of admiration from the crowd, created a unique auditory texture. The jousts themselves were thrilling. Knights, armed with lances, charged at each other across the barrier, aiming to unseat their opponents. The crack of splintering wood as lances met shields echoed across the piazza, drawing gasps and cheers from the spectators. The sounds of horses galloping, the shouts of the heralds, and the clatter of armor created a cacophony of martial excitement. Although the lances were blunted, the power of the impact was immense, and the risks were real, adding to the drama. The knights, in their gleaming armor, moved with a controlled intensity, their movements precise and powerful. The scent of horse sweat, dust, and metal was pervasive in the jousting arena. Between the jousts, various artistic performances entertained the crowd. Musicians played stirring fanfares on trumpets and shawms, and more delicate tunes on lutes and harps during quiet interludes. Singers performed ballads and madrigals, some of which were composed by Lorenzo himself, praising Giuliano's valor and the beauty of Simonetta. Acrobats performed daring feats of agility, tumbling and balancing, drawing applause from the crowd. Fair jugglers kept multiple objects in the air, their colorful costumes flashing with each movement. The atmosphere was one of continuous entertainment, a blend of martial spectacle and refined artistry. Food and drink were readily available for the public. Vendors offered hot spiced wine, a perfect antidote to the crisp Florentine air, and simple but satisfying fare like focaccia, roasted chestnuts, and dried fruit. For the dignitaries and the Medici family, in the grandstands, more elaborate refreshments were served. Servants circulated with trays of delicate pastries, small game birds, and fine wines. The clinking of silver and crystal added a refined note to the sounds of the crowd. The aroma of roasted meats and sweet pastries mingled with the scents of the arena. The tournament was more than just a sporting event. It was a grand allegorical narrative. It subtly positioned the Medici not just as political leaders, but as patrons of art and culture, as leaders of chivalry and beauty. The cost was immense, but the propaganda value was priceless. The memory of Giuliano's stunning entrance and the overall artistic splendor of the Giostra would linger in Florence for generations, a testament to the Medici's power to transform a mere event into an enduring legend. Number 4, the imperial nuptials of Cosimo, the first di Medici and Eleonora di Toledo. The year is 1539. Cosimo I de' Medici, still a young man, has seized control of Florence after a period of republican turmoil. His position is tenuous, but his ambition is immense. To solidify his power and connect the Medici dynasty to the most powerful noble houses in Europe, he orchestrates a marriage to Eleonora di Toledo, daughter of the Viceroy of Naples, and a distant relative of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. This wedding was not just the celebration, it was a brazen, opulent declaration of the Medici's new status as sovereign rulers of Florence, a performance designed to impress not only the Florentines, but all of Europe. The scale of the festivities was staggering. A symphony of gold, silk, and imperial grandeur, the city of Florence was transformed. The Arches of Triumph, covered in intricate plasterwork and painted with allegorical scenes, spanned the main thoroughfares. Statues of classical gods and heroes, temporary but grand, were erected in piazzas. Every major building was adorned with tapestries, banners, and fresh garlands. Fresh flowers mingled with the general buzz of preparation, the sounds of hammering and painting echoing through the streets. Eleanor's arrival was the first spectacular event. She arrived by way of the Arno River, not a simple boat, but a magnificent gilded barge, designed to resemble a mythological vessel. It was draped with rich fabrics, its oars manned by rowers dressed in elaborate costumes. As the barge moved slowly along the river, accompanied by a fleet of smaller, decorated boats, music played from on-board musicians' trumpets, flutes, and drums. The water itself became a shimmering stage, reflecting the dazzling display. The riverbanks were packed with thousands of spectators, their cheers echoing across the water. The scent of the river water mixed with the perfumes carried on the breeze from the barge. Upon disembarking, Eleonora began a procession through the city that rivaled any triumphal parade of ancient Rome. She rode in a magnificent velvet-lined litter, carried by liveried servants, or sometimes on a caparisoned horse, depending on the stage of the procession. Her wedding gown was a marvel of Spanish fashion and Florentine artistry, a gown of silver brocade, heavily embroidered with gold thread, and encrusted with thousands of pearls and precious jewels. Her head was adorned with a coronet of diamonds, and her hair was intricately styled. The rustle of her rich fabrics, was barely audible over the murmur of the crowd. The procession included members of both the Medici and Toledo families, Florentine nobles, foreign dignitaries, and hundreds of servants and guards, all dressed in their finest attire. There were companies of soldiers in gleaming armor, their weapons catching the light. Pages in brightly colored silks led horses adorned with elaborate caparisons. The sound of hundreds of footsteps, the occasional whinny of a horse, and the constant hum of the crowd created a dense tapestry of sound. The scent of exotic perfumes worn by the nobility mingled with the more earthy scents of the horses and the throng. The wedding ceremony itself took place in the grandest setting, the Church of San Lorenzo, which the Medici had long patronized. The interior was magnificently decorated with rare textiles and an abundance of flowers. Following the ceremony, the wedding banquet was held in the Palazzo Medici, a feast of truly astounding proportions. The tables groaned under the weight of countless dishes. Roasted boars, cooked whole and presented on enormous platters, were carved with elaborate ceremony. Swans and peacocks, adorned with their reconstructed plumage, gleamed on silver trays. There were enormous fish caught in distant seas and rushed to Florence, prepared with delicate sauces. Pastries shaped like coats of arms and mythological figures were intricate works of sugar art, standing several feet high. Rare spices, imported from the East, infused many of the dishes, their aromas filling the grand hall. The wine flowed from massive casks into silver ewers, and from there into every guest's goblet, never ceasing. The clinking of countless silver and gold utensils, the murmur of conversation, and the rich sense of the food created a sensory overload of luxury. The entertainment that followed was equally extravagant. The Medici had pioneered the intermezzi, elaborate musical and theatrical performances between the acts of plays. For this wedding, they were particularly spectacular. Stage machinery, operated by hidden mechanisms, allowed mythological figures to fly through the air on clouds, or deities to emerge from beneath the stage on mechanical serpents. The costumes for these performances were incredibly detailed, designed by artists like Bronzino and Vasari, and made from the most expensive silks and velvets, adorned with jewels. Musicians played a wide array of instruments, including new innovations like the harpsichord alongside lutes, viols, and early brass instruments. The music was complex and harmonious, a blend of voices and instruments. The sounds of mechanical gears turning, the rustle of stage costumes, and the rising crescendo of the music filled the air. One of the most remarkable spectacles was a mock naval battle staged on the Arno. Specially constructed galleys representing ancient warships engaged in a simulated combat, complete with fireworks and pyrotechnics that lit up the night sky. The explosions and flashes, reflecting on the dark river, created a breathtaking effect. This event was a powerful display of military might and technological innovation, demonstrating Cosimo's control over both land and water. The roar of the mock cannons, the shouts of the participants, and the cheers of the crowd created an immense soundscape. The smell of gunpowder hung in the air. The festivities continued for days, with balls, more banquets, and public celebrations. The wedding of Cosimo I and Eleonora di Toledo was more than just a marriage. It was a carefully choreographed statement of power, a lavish performance that solidified the Medici's new ducal status and announced Florence's re-emergence as a cultural and political force on the European stage. The total cost was astronomical, but for Cosimo the investment in prestige was well worth it. Number 3, the intermezzi for La Pellegrina, Ferdinando I's wedding. The year is 1589. Ferdinando I de' Medici, Grand Duke of Tuscany, is marrying Christine of Lorraine, a French princess, daughter of Charles III, Duke of Lorraine and Claude of France. This marriage was not just a union of two prominent families. It was a grand political alliance between the powerful Medici state and the French monarchy. And to celebrate it, Ferdinando spared no expense, commissioning a series of theatrical performances so revolutionary and lavish that they fundamentally shaped the future of opera and spectacle. The most famous of these were the 6 intermezzi for the comedy La Pellegrina, which became a benchmark for dramatic extravagance. These intermezzi were not simply decorative interludes. They were complex, standalone, allegorical narratives designed to be performed between the acts of the main play. They were a celebration of the power of music, poetry, and visual spectacle, all woven together to extol the virtues of the Medici and their new French alliance. For months leading up to the wedding, workshops buzzed with activity. Artists like Bernardo Buontalenti, the celebrated architect, engineer, and stage designer, were at the helm, pushing the boundaries of what was technologically possible. The performances took place in the Grand Ducal Theatre within the Uffizi Gallery, a space specifically designed to showcase such spectacles. The stage itself was a marvel of Renaissance engineering. Thousands of yards of silk, velvet, and brocade were used for the costumes of hundreds of performers. The gold and silver threads shimmered under the light of countless oil lamps and candles. The scent of beeswax from the candles mingled with the perfume worn by the aristocratic audience. The rustle of rich fabrics as performers moved created a subtle undercurrent of sound. Each intermezzo depicted a scene from classical mythology, focusing on the power of music to control and harmonize the universe. The first intermezzo began with the harmony of the spheres. Performers, dressed as various celestial bodies and mythological figures, appeared suspended in the air, seemingly floating on clouds. This was achieved through an ingenious system of ropes, counterweights, and hidden machinery, allowing actors to fly across the stage. The sheer awe of seeing people seemingly defy gravity drew gasps from the audience. Their costumes were adorned with sparkling jewels and reflective materials designed to catch the light and create a dazzling effect. The sounds of instruments and voices, perfectly synchronized, filled the vast space. One of the most talked about intermezzi featured a giant, fire-breathing dragon emerging from beneath the stage, its eyes glowing, smoke billowing from its nostrils. This was achieved through complex mechanisms and pyrotechnics, startling and delighting the audience simultaneously. The roar of the dragon, simulated by hidden musicians and sound effects, reverberated through the hall, a visceral sensation. Performers, dressed as mythical heroes, engaged the dragon in a staged battle, their swords clashing with dramatic sounds. The scent of gunpowder and sulfur from the pyrotechnics briefly filled the air, adding to the immersive experience. The music for these intermezzi was revolutionary. Composers like Emilio de Cavalieri and Giulio Caccini wrote elaborate scores for large ensembles combining voices, lutes, viols, flutes, and early brass instruments. The music was designed to be deeply expressive, accompanying the dramatic action on stage. There were intricate choral pieces, solo songs, that showcased the virtuosity of the singers, and instrumental passages that created atmosphere. The sound of hundreds of voices blending in harmony, the rich timbre of the viols, and the bright clarity of the lutes filled the hall, enchanting the audience. The entire theater was a resonant chamber for this new expressive music. The costumes were works of art in themselves. Hundreds of actors, singers, and dancers wore bespoke garments, each meticulously designed to reflect the mythological figures they portrayed. Nymphs wore flowing gowns adorned with fresh flowers and ribbons. Gods wore gilded armor and elaborate crowns. Satyrs wore animal skins and horns. Every detail, from the embroidery on a sleeve to the jewels on a headdress, was considered. The sheer number of distinct lavish costumes was a testament to the vast sums spent. The rustle of these expensive fabrics as performers moved, the subtle clinking of their adornments added to the sensory richness. The stage sets were constantly transforming, revealing new scenes with astonishing speed. Mountains would split open to reveal grottos. Clouds would descend to bring gods to earth. Water effects, simulated with shimmering fabrics and lighting, created illusions of lakes and rivers. The use of perspective painting created incredible depth, making the stage seem far larger than it was. The lighting, provided by thousands of candles and oil lamps, was carefully controlled to create dramatic shadows and highlights, enhancing the illusions. The scent of the burning wicks and the oils filled the theater, a constant subtle presence. The overall effect was one of utter enchantment. The intermezzi for La Pellegrina were more than just entertainment. They were a profound statement about the Medici's power to command artistic and technological genius, to create a world of myth and beauty right before the eyes of their distinguished guests. The cost was truly astronomical, running into tens of thousands of ducats. But for Ferdinando, it was an investment in prestige, a dazzling display that elevated the Medici family to the very pinnacle of European royalty and set a new standard for courtly spectacle. The sounds of applause, the hushed gasps of wonder, and the soaring music created an unforgettable night for the attendees. Number 2. The Baptism of Philip de' Medici. The year is 1577. Francesco I de' Medici, Grand Duke of Tuscany, and his wife Joanna of Austria are celebrating the birth of their first son, Philip. While seemingly a private family affair, the baptism of an heir to the Grand Duchy was, in the Medici tradition, transformed into an unprecedented public spectacle, a grand display of dynastic continuity, imperial connections, and the sheer wealth that characterized the late 16th century Medici court. It was a week-long series of events, culminating in a procession and a banquet that left no doubt about the Medici's secure place at the apex of European power. Preparations for the baptism were meticulously planned for months. The city of Florence was once again draped in finery. The streets along the procession route were cleaned and adorned with tapestries, garlands, and temporary arches emblazoned with the Medici coat of arms and the double-headed eagle of the Habsburgs, a nod to Joanna's imperial lineage. The scent of fresh greenery and beeswax from countless new candles filled the air in churches and palaces. Workshops across the city churned out magnificent costumes, elaborate props, and countless ceremonial items. The main event was the procession from the Pitti Palace, the Grand Ducal residence, to the Baptistery of San Giovanni, where the ceremony would take place. This was no ordinary walk. It was a moving panorama of power and artistry. The procession was led by trumpeters and drummers, their brass fanfares echoing through the city, interspersed with the rhythmic beat of the drums. Following them were pages, dressed in the Medici livery of red and white velvet, their costumes gleaming with gold embroidery. Then came the aristocracy of Florence, followed by foreign ambassadors and dignitaries, each vying to outdo the others in the splendor of their attire. Their robes of silk and brocade rustled with every step. Jewels glittered on their clothing and in their hair. The scent of exotic perfumes from across Europe mingled in the air. The Grand Ducal Guard, in their impeccably maintained armor, provided a formidable presence, their polished breastplates reflecting the Florentine sun. The clink of their armor and the steady beat of their marching added a military precision to the procession. At the heart of the procession was the baptismal party itself. The infant Philip, swaddled in the finest silk and lace, was carried by his nurse, accompanied by the Grand Duke Francesco and Grand Duchess Joanna, both dressed in gowns of unparalleled opulence. Joanna's gown, a creation of heavy, dark velvet, was embroidered with thousands of pearls and diamonds, shimmering with every slight movement. Her jewels alone were worth a king's ransom. Francesco wore a suit of black velvet, richly embroidered with silver, and a heavy gold chain of office. Their presence filled the air with their regal authority and the faint scent of their expensive garments. The most spectacular element of the procession was the array of gifts being carried to the baptistery for the child. These were not just token presents, they were priceless works of art, each designed to proclaim the wealth and taste of the Medici. There were large, ornate, silver fonts intricately engraved. There were gold reliquaries encrusted with precious stones. There were vast amounts of silk and velvet fabric, enough to clothe an army. These gifts were carried on velvet cushions by liveried servants, gleaming in the sunlight. The crowd murmured with awe at each display of treasure. Upon reaching the baptistery, the ancient structure was transformed for the ceremony. The baptismal font, a medieval masterpiece, was surrounded by fresh flowers and burning candles, their light reflecting on the mosaic interior. The scent of beeswax and frankincense filled the air. The ceremony itself was solemn and majestic, with high-ranking clergy performing the rites. The sounds of prayers and liturgical chants filled the hallowed space. Following the baptism, the grand banquet was held in the Palazzo Pitti. The scale of this feast was truly monumental. Multiple halls were set up with long tables, capable of seating hundreds of guests. The tables were laden with every conceivable delicacy. There were entire roasted oxen presented whole on enormous wooden platters, garlanded with herbs and flowers. Spits turned with countless game birds, pheasants, quails, partridges, their succulent aromas filling the vast rooms. Fish, some imported from the far reaches of the Mediterranean, were served in elaborate presentations. Exotic fruits, spices, and confectionaries, many unseen in Europe before, testified to the Medici's vast trading empire. Sugar sculptures, some several meters high, depicted allegorical scenes or the Medici crest. Wine flowed from hundreds of large barrels into silver and gold goblets, never pausing. The sounds of hundreds of conversations, punctuated by laughter and the clinking of precious silverware, created a roaring, celebratory hum. The entertainment at the banquet was as elaborate as the food. The musicians, stationed in various galleries, played constant melodies on lutes, harps, viols, and wind instruments. Singers performed madrigals and festive songs. There were commedie dell'arte performers, their witty improvisations and masked characters drawing laughter from the guests. Professional dancers performed intricate, stately dances, their costumes rustling with every turn. The sheer scale of the entertainment meant that no guest was left without a sensory delight. The celebrations continued for several days with public festivities in the piazzas. There were mock battles, theatrical performances, and more banquets. The streets remained alight with torches and reverberated with music. The baptism of Philip de' Medici was a carefully constructed piece of political theater, a resounding declaration of the Medici's established power, their wealth, and their firm connection to the imperial lineage of Europe. The cost was exorbitant, but for the Grand Duke it was an investment in the future of his dynasty, cementing their place as legitimate rulers of Tuscany. Number 1. The wedding of Ferdinando I de' Medici and Christine of Lorraine. The year is 1589. This is it. The crescendo, the ultimate display of Medici power, wealth, and artistic patronage. Grand Duke Ferdinando I de' Medici's marriage to Christine of Lorraine, a granddaughter of Catherine de' Medici, Queen of France, was not just a wedding, it was a strategically vital alliance that solidified the Medici's standing with the most powerful monarchy in Europe. To celebrate this union, Ferdinando orchestrated a series of festivities that spanned several months and reached a peak of decadence unseen before or since in Florence. This was the moment the Medici truly proved they could outspend, outdesign, and outperform any other court in Europe. The entire city of Florence became a stage. Months before the wedding, artists, architects, engineers, and thousands of laborers were mobilized. Grand triumphal arches, each a temporary architectural marvel, were erected across the city. These were adorned with allegorical paintings, sculptures, and inscriptions celebrating the union and the virtues of the Medici. Fountains were redesigned to spout wine instead of water. Whole streets were paved, cleaned, and draped with miles of silk and velvet banners, many embroidered with gold thread. The scent of fresh paint, newly cut wood, and the excited chatter of the city filled the air. Christine of Lorraine's grand arrival in Florence was a spectacle that rivaled any imperial procession. She approached the city not in a simple carriage, but in a retinue of unprecedented size and splendor. Her personal guard, dressed in gleaming armor, rode on magnificently caparisoned horses. She herself was seated in a magnificent gilded coach drawn by 6 white horses adorned with plumes and precious harnesses. Her gown, a creation of shimmering white silk brocade, was entirely covered in pearls and diamonds, catching every ray of light. Her tiara, a masterpiece of jeweler's art, sparkled with an almost blinding intensity. The rustle of her dress, the soft jingle of the horses' bells, and the rising roar of the crowd created a symphony of sound. The procession wound through the city, past thousands of cheering Florentines. Every window, every balcony, every rooftop was crammed with spectators. Trumpeters announced her arrival with a fanfare that reverberated through the ancient stones of Florence. Drummers kept a steady, exciting beat. The scent of exotic perfumes, carried on the breeze from the lavishly dressed courtiers, mingled with the earthy smell of the horses and the throng. Foreign dignitaries and ambassadors, each with their own lavish retinues, added to the international flavor of the display. The wedding ceremony took place in the Duomo, Florence's majestic cathedral, which was transformed into an ethereal space with thousands of candles, enormous tapestries, and fresh flowers. The light from the candles created a warm, flickering glow on the frescoes and marble. The sounds of sacred music, performed by a massive choir and orchestra, filled the vast space, their harmonies soaring into the vaulted ceiling. The wedding banquet, held in the Palazzo Pitti, was legendary. It was not just a meal, it was a multi-sensory performance of gastronomic and artistic excess. The tables, stretching for hundreds of feet, groaned under the weight of countless dishes. Roasted peacocks, swans, and ostriches, artfully refeathered in their original plumage, were presented on enormous silver platters, their iridescent feathers gleaming. Whole roasted boars, their heads adorned with garlands, were carved with ceremonial knives. Exotic fish, brought from distant waters and prepared with rare spices, were arranged in elaborate tableaux. The air was thick with the rich aromas of roasted meats, spices, and fine wines. The sweet courses were true works of art. Sugar sculptures, some reaching several feet in height, depicted mythological scenes, classical temples, and the coats of arms of the Medici and Lorraine families. These were temporary masterpieces designed to be admired before being consumed. Marzipan, candied fruits, and pastries of every description, many flavored with expensive spices like cinnamon and nutmeg, were arranged in geometric patterns. The wine, of the finest vintages from Tuscany and beyond, flowed like water from enormous silver fountains, continuously refilled by liveried servants. The clinking of crystal and silver, the murmur of hundreds of conversations, and the occasional burst of joyous laughter created a continuous, vibrant hum of celebration. The entertainment that accompanied the banquet, and indeed lasted for days, was unparalleled. Beyond the famous intermezzi for La Pellegrina, there were a myriad of other performances. A mock naval battle was staged on the Arno River, complete with specially constructed galleys and fireworks that lit up the night sky, their reflections shimmering on the dark water. The roar of mock cannons, the shouts of the participants, and the cheers of the thousands lining the riverbanks created an immense soundscape. The smell of gunpowder briefly hung in the air. There were grand theatrical productions staged in temporary theaters featuring elaborate stage machinery, flying effects, and stunning transformations. Musicians played continuously, performing new compositions that combined voices and instruments in groundbreaking ways. Viols, harpsichords, trumpets, and flutes filled the air, providing a constant soundtrack to the festivities. And dancers, dressed in magnificent costumes, performed intricate ballets that combined classical grace with allegorical storytelling. The rustle of their silk and velvet costumes, the soft thud of their feet, and the rhythmic beat of the music created a hypnotic effect. Public festivities included elaborate street pageants where citizens could witness allegorical floats parading through the city. These floats often depicted classical gods and goddesses or personifications of virtues, all lavishly adorned. The cost of these spectacles was truly monumental, estimated to be in the hundreds of thousands of ducats, a sum that would bankrupt most European states. But for Ferdinando, it was a necessary investment, a bold declaration of the Medici's unassailable power, their refined taste, and their ability to command the artistic and technological genius of the age. The wedding of Ferdinando I and Christine of Lorraine was not just a marriage, it was a grand, unforgettable performance, a culmination of Medici decadence that cemented their place as the ultimate patrons of power and spectacle in Renaissance Europe.